We're ready for our next speaker, Moray King. He's been in this field forever, and he actually started researching in 1974, 10 years before the first Tesla symposium in Colorado Springs. So he really knows his stuff. He's, I think, one of the best mathematicians I've ever run into, and I greatly admire that. He's got a degree in electrical engineering, a graduate degree in systems engineering, and he currently works a lot doing software engineering. So he's got 3 books out: Tapping the Zero-Point Energy, Quest for Zero-Point Energy, and The Energy Machine of T. Henry Moray. And these are all very, very highly recommended books, especially for students. So here's Moray King.
Well, thank you, Michael. Can you all hear me? That's great. Isn't this conference great? For me, one of my favorite moments of this conference actually occurred on the first night, Thursday night, when we had that big thunderstorm, because we've been in a drought here in Utah, and I haven't been in the rain since the middle of June. So I got out there in the lightning with Peter Linderman with me, and Steve Elswick was with me, and I told them a story about lightning that I read, and they said, "Oh, you got to share that." So here it goes. This comes from science essays by children, and it goes like this: when you see a lightning flash, you can count to see how close you've come to being hit. If you don't hear anything, that means you got hit. So never mind. Well, actually, while doing this research, preparing this talk for this year, okay, is that better? I got hit by the realization that my dream actually has come true. It's always been my dream since I got started and learned about the zero-point energy and saw suppression of inventors and everything else, that the way this thing is actually going to break open into society is by massive replication by the inventing community, our community. And what I've learned is a project is already repeating out there, and it's easy to do. Any hobbyist can do it if they want to do it. It self-runs and it produces excess energy. And the only downside is the inventors think they're burning water as a fuel, when in actuality they're disassociating water with the zero-point energy. You need to turn me on. There we go. Okay. You want to just start the small link? You want to run the video? Yeah.
The top, our news here at 6 o'clock, an age-old dream becoming a reality. A local inventor has discovered a way, hear this, to use water to run your car.
It's a major breakthrough that will no doubt make motorists happy. And as Ralph Robinson explains, the Pentagon is also showing lots of interest in this project.
Water has always been considered a precious commodity, but Stan Meyer's invention may make it even more valuable. He has developed what's called a water fuel cell. It has taken the place of his old gas tank. The water fuel cell breaks down water molecules into oxygen and hydrogen. The hydrogen is used to run his dune buggy.
I don't care if you use rainwater, well water, city water, ocean water. If you don't have any fresh water, go ahead and use snow. If you don't have any snow available to you, they use salt water because there's no adverse effect to the fuel cell.
Meyer started working on this project 4 years ago. He's not a scientist. He isn't even a chemist. In fact, he never graduated from college. Myers was determined, he says, to design something to protect this country from oil embargoes.
And we have calculated that if we take the dune buggy from Los Angeles to New York, we would roughly use 22 gallons of water.
The Pentagon flew a lieutenant colonel in last week to look at Meyer's invention. There's talk of possibly using it in the Star Wars defense program and to run Army tanks. Myers is currently perfecting a water fuel cell for cars. It will cost about $1,500. He says it won't need any maintenance, and you won't have to replace it. It'll be at least 2 years before the fuel system goes into mass production. The day it happens will be one the fuel industry hates, but it'll put a smile on the face of those who've had to say at one time or another, fill her up. I'm Ralph Robinson.
As you can see, many patents have already been received, and many more are forthcoming. To date, over 42 patents have been applied for.
Okay. Well, he's not the only one. Let's run him.
Turn the machine on. Denny Klein fires up his hot new invention. His machine emits a flame that feels only slightly warm to the touch. But watch what happens when he touches anything else. Instantaneously, I can burn a hole right down through the center of that brick. The flame instantly turns hotter than the surface of the sun. Heat so intense it takes only seconds to literally burn a hole through charcoal. 3 seconds turns a brass ball to glowing liquid metal. Tungsten lights up like a sparkler. Steel, lead, and other metals slices on contact. Yet the tip of the welder stays cool to the touch. No other gas will do this. Denny Klein uses an alternative fuel source once thought impossible. He says people still have trouble believing him when he reveals his liquid fuel.
Water. Take water and electricity, and we break it down through our very unique electrolysis process.
Klein has just patented his process of converting H2O to HHO, producing a gas that combines the atomic power of hydrogen with the chemical stability of water.
It turns right back to water. You can see the water running off of this.
Klein originally designed his water-burning engine for cutting metal. He thought his invention would replace volatile acetylene in welding factories. Then one day, as he drove to his laboratory in Clearwater, he thought of another way to burn his HHO gas.
On a 100-mile trip, we use about 4 ounces of water.
Klein says his prototype 1994 Ford Escort can travel exclusively on water, though he currently has it rigged to run as a water and gasoline hybrid.
Simply speaking, it can change the world by reducing our dependence on fossil fuels.
These are equivalent to our... Pete Dominici is helping Klein take his hydrogen technology patents from a 2-room office in Clearwater to consumer markets around the world.
You know what? Microsoft came out of nowhere, came out of the garage. Why not hydrogen technologies?
The duo is already in negotiations with one U.S. automaker and the U.S. government. Their plans have grown from basic welding with water to powering the entire world from the safest and cleanest fuel on Earth. Craig Patrick, Fox News.
Members of Congress recently invited Denny Klein to Washington to demonstrate his technology. Now his company is currently developing a Hummer for the U.S. military that can run on both water and gasoline. So far, his water-powered engines have passed all performance safety inspections, so all systems appear to be go right now. Gives new meaning to the term running water.
You just have to hope that water prices don't go up like the gas.
One more.
Instead of paying almost $4 for gas, how would you like to run your car on salt water? Now, it may sound crazy, but wait until you see what a local inventor has come up with that could change the world. And as Channel 3's Michael Meyer shows us, that's not all he's trying to do.
Retired TV station owner and broadcast engineer John Kanzius was not looking for an answer to the energy crisis. He was looking for a way to cure cancer. 4 years ago, inspiration struck in the middle of the night. Why not use radio waves to kill the cancer cells?
The best thing that would work as antennas was I could find at 3 o'clock in the morning was my wife's fly pants.
His wife Marianne heard the noise and found her husband inventing a radio frequency generator using her pie pans.
I got up immediately and thought he'd lost it.
Here are the basics of John's idea. Radio waves will heat certain metals like gold. Tiny bits of that metal are injected into a cancer patient. Those nanoparticles are attracted to the abnormalities of the cancer cell and ignore the healthy cells. The patient is then exposed to radio waves and only the bad cells heat up and die. Killing cancer cells is amazing, but John had also stumbled on yet another amazing breakthrough. You have enough in there? His machine could actually burn salt water. John Kanzius discovered that his radio frequency generator could release the oxygen and hydrogen from salt water and create an incredibly intense flame.
Just like that. If that was inside a car cylinder, you could see the amount of fire that would be in the cylinder. I could put my hand in here.
Put your hand into the beam, nothing happens. Put in a fluorescent bulb and it lights up immediately. At the APV Company Laboratory in Akron, top engineers have checked out John's amazing invention and they were amazed.
And we saw it go up to 1,500 degrees centigrade, the temperature. And it's incredible.
This simple Stirling engine is running with the heat generated by the flames coming off that test tube. the fuel nothing more than salt water.
Well, that could be a steam engine, a steam turbine. Could be a car engine if you wanted it to be.
That's the true American innovator. Someone that is not looking for something, he just finds it.
This is the most abundant element in the world, water. And salt water is everywhere. And to see it burn actually gives me chills.
So imagine the possibilities. Salt water as the ultimate clean fuel, a happy byproduct of one man searching for a cure for cancer. In Erie, Pennsylvania, Michael Meyer, Channel 3 News.
That is amazing. We want it now. Inventor John Kanzius says that if some big company wants to buy up his saltwater fuel invention, that's okay. He wants to use all the money to finish his quest to find a cure for cancer.
Solving the energy crisis, I don't think the powers that be are pleased with him. So what's going on? Everybody knows from high school thermodynamics that it costs you more energy to break apart the water than you get back when you combust the hydrogen. And that's why the academic community simply dismisses this as poppycock. You can just pay them to be a consultant. They'll say, I don't even need to look. It's impossible. It's fraud. Yet the inventors are succeeding. There's replication by hobbyists. They're sharing information on the World Wide Web. They're using very similar apparatus, and they're improving the electrical stimulation to get over unity effects. I've seen claims 3 times, 7 times, 10 times. What's the energy source? In this talk, I'm going to propose that we're actually producing charged water gas clusters in this apparatus. They exhibit excessive energy, bring down the gain, exhibit excess energy, and that's sourced from the 0-point energy. We're going to support that by observing anomalies in clustering in general from plasmas. Plasmas, ball lightning, the charge clusters of Ken Shoulders, who also calls them EVs or EVOs for electron volitum and exotic vacuum objects. Energy anomalies associated with plasmas, pulsing plasmas in inert gas clusters, and now water gas clusters are all self-organizing vacuum energy and trapping it in the clusters. It's a very popular topic on the web. This is the first site. Okay, thank you. They have a cluster map of all the hits. So when you hit the site, you'll register a count. Notice where the deserts are. They don't seem to be very interested in water projects. But these are great overview sites where they organize the work and they can get you started on the research. Here's some of the inventors I'll be covering in the talk. Some are very famous, like Yul Brown, who managed to get the gas named after him, Brown's gas. Some you may know, some are very recent. The nature of the apparatus is using lots of parallel electrodes. The closer the better, whether we use parallel plates or concentric cylinders, as in the Joe cell, or you can use concentric cones. The nature of the electrical stimulation, at first people were using DC, they would get some results. When they use pulse DC, they do better. When they use dynamic tuning, feeding back, measuring something to optimize, pick the pulse frequency that optimizes the output. And if we work at the Keeley disassociation frequencies, we do even better. Keeley was an inventor at the turn of the century. He believed in an ether. He worked with ultrasonics and sonics, and he would work with water, and he has a water cavitation motor. And I'd like to recommend and commend Jerry Decker's work and Dale Pond's work, who have wonderful websites that overview Keeley. Now, Keeley believed in an ether, but didn't the Michelson and Morley interferometer experiment rule out an ether, and then the scientific community abolished it? Well, not so fast, because right after Michelson and Morley did the work, Dayton Miller worked with Michelson in building an interferometer 10 times more sensitive. At sea level, they got the same result that Michelson and Morley originally got. He worked for over 20 years, made 200,000 measurements. When he went up to Mount Wilson, they would get and see an ether drift that supported the ether models where the Earth drags the ether along with it. And you can read all about it on that website. And he was the president of the American Physical Society. He was a heavyweight in physics. Einstein hated him because nobody could refute his work. They couldn't refute it till after he died. So that took us through 1930 when quantum mechanics came in, and now they had an energetic substrate that they called the zero-point energy, fluctuations of electromagnetic field energy that give rise to the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, and Dirac proposed that it produces pairs, electron-positron pairs from the vacuum itself, the virtual sea of quantum energy. The zero-point energy is well supported in the literature. In the physical review, we can see articles that support why we get quantum effects by matter's interaction with the zero-point energy. It is considered how Puthoff derived, how it can just show how the hydrogen atom is stable, how it can be an energy source without violating thermodynamics. It can be the source of gravity and be the source of inertia itself, meaning that if you can cohere to zero-point energy in some statistical sense, you can then create inertialess propulsion where you can do very rapid accelerations without feeling the stress. What does it look like? It's called the quantum foam. It's basically like a virtual turbulent plasma with electric flux entering and electric flux immediately leaving in space. It's chaos. They describe the order of those particles that they show where the electric flux enters and leaves as the Planck length, 10 to the minus 33rd centimeters. It's 20 orders of magnitude smaller than the electron. The question is, can any type of organization occur in this chaos? When I asked my professors that in the 70s, they said, absolutely not. That's chaos, that's random. Random things must forever remain random. That's the law of entropy. But in 1977, Ilya Prigogine wins the Nobel Prize in chemistry for showing how self-organization can occur. And he said, any system that exhibits three characteristics, they must be nonlinear, far from equilibrium, and have an energy flux through it, can exhibit characteristics of self-organization. In Wheeler's theories of geometry dynamics, he describes the zero-point energy as sourcing from a flux from a higher dimensional space. That as it comes through randomly, this is flatland. This is our universe. Imagine we're on a plane, and the flux is coming in at right angles. So when there's a little bit of judder, we just see it as the background zero-point energy. When there's a tilt to it, we call it a polarized vacuum. If vorticity exists in it, we detect it as an elementary particle. And in this model, the flux of the zero-point energy is like the stream, and the whirlpool that is like the particle. And you need the flow of the stream to support the particle, to support the whirlpool. So this is Wheeler's geometry dynamics. Robert Laughlin wrote a book about how everything can arise from self-organization. I highly recommend this book. It's a layman's book. It just came out a couple years ago. He won the Nobel Prize in Physics, and he's basically on the same page in the physics. Let's go back. I'll take it back. All right. So how do we cohere to zero-point energy? We work with a highly nonlinear system like a plasma. We abruptly drive it far from equilibrium with abrupt pulsing. We maximize the zero-point energy interaction by using those particles which interact with it best to activate it and create vortex forms that tend to trap it. Conduction band electrons, that's just electrons that flow in ordinary wire, typically do not interact with the zero-point energy. They're basically in a thermodynamic equilibrium with it, like a smeared cloud. However, the ions exhibit steep lines of vacuum polarization towards the nucleus. And this is what you can use to activate the zero-point energy. Any abrupt motion of nuclei can create a zero-point energy interaction or activation. Do they see it in the experiments? Sure, they see them in the heavy ion collision experiments. They call them exotic coherent vacuum states in quantum electrodynamics arising from heavy ion collisions. It's in the literature. What happens when we oscillate ions synchronously together? That's called the ion acoustic mode of a plasma. Launches vacuum polarization displacement current. Do they see energy anomalies? They sure do. They see in their experiments, it's in the literature, large radiant energy absorption, high frequency spikes, runaway electrons, anomalous heating, etc. Harold Aspin wrote some papers supporting this point of view that says there's enormous explosive effects found from pulsed ion discharge in pure water, and that the force is proportional to the mass of the ion over the mass of the electron times the ion current squared. A form of self-organization that surprised the physics community occurred in the mid-'80s, where they noticed gases could actually form into clusters. Inert gases, or noble gases, or rare gases, aren't supposed to interact. All the electron shells are filled. Yet, when subject to pulse plasmas, they form up into clusters. These clusters exhibit anomalous energy. When they do a laser excitation, causes the clusters to explode, and they abrupt release of kinetic energy is observed. And this has really puzzled the scientific community. There's structure to it. That's why they call magic numbers. The number of atoms that are participating in the cluster. They can have different types of inert gases participating in the cluster. And they found they form icosahedral structures, and they can be large. It's well known in our community that the vortex ring form is a great way to trap energy. And this group here is modeled ball lightning. I recommend their website, and they have electron spiral model on the toroid, and they're saying they're getting excess energy, and a lot of people have said that about ball lightning in the standard literature. Here's a paper that describes how the force-free vortex that closes on itself, the vortex ring, yields a natural stability. And they noticed that when you pulse plasmas, they can naturally form up into plasmoids or vortex rings. Ken Shoulders has probably done the most to study the details of this, especially the energy anomaly, because he launches his charge clusters. They're very, very small forms of microscopic ball lightning. They're in the order of a micron. And he can measure the energy because he only has picojoules on his capacitor, and he can measure what kind of pulse he gets off when EV hits a conductor, and with an electron microscope examine the damage. The EVs, or EVOs as he calls them, exhibit a charge about 10 to the 11th electrons that contain about 10 to the 6 ions. It has a charge to mass ratio of that of electrons, and it contains excessive energy. There's Ken Shoulders' website. Our own Dr. Fox and Dr. Jin made a classical model of a vortex ring to show how it's stable, and they showed that in the classical model that the thin ring filament squeezes down to energy densities exceeding that of a neutron star, and of course at those energy densities we'll have a vacuum energy interaction, and the classical model at that point really won't apply. Peter Granos has observed it experimentally when he does his pulse water experiments. He photographed the plasmoid forming in the barrel of his water gun, and he's shown he's got anomalous or excessive energy and excess force coming from his water discharge experiments. Ken Shoulders says, boy, I claimed the biggest anomaly for the minimum energy input to get the maximum effect out was his vortex water gun, where you create a vortex of water and then you shoot an EV right down the middle of it. And he says, you would not believe the power of the pulse you get off of that thing. And he says, for a little bit of energy he made the EV, he got an extremely powerful pulse that unfortunately damages anything that it hits. So he couldn't find a way to tap the energy yet. It's like shooting a bullet at a windmill blade. Terrible impedance mismatch for grabbing the energy. I really lit up when I read about this on the web. This is the MIT plasmatron. It's a circulating arc that forms, and I thought, man, that's producing a plasma vortex. And they originally made it to do a better ignition of normal gas fuel. And they then realized, gee, I can disassociate water with this. Now, I don't think they are so bold as to make an energy claim, claiming over unity, of course, because academia is not allowed to do that. However, Philip Kanarev of the Soviet Union, he's a professor there. He's not as bashful. He just says, I got over unity 10-1. And here's an example of his plasma electrolysis reactor. And he would demonstrate in Russia a 3 kilowatt demo. By the way, he's a real heavyweight. I recommend reading his stuff because he's a professor and very, very bright. He's created his own theory of quantum theory, trying to explain some of these effects. But what's really on topic is he created a low amp, a low power version of an electrolytic cell using concentric cones. And when he makes lots of concentric cones, he creates the water disassociation very similar to all the other projects that we'll be studying right now. In standard electrolysis, we separate the electrodes. We use palladium, we get oxygen on one side, we get hydrogen on the other side. This will not form up in any water gas clusters. You'll just see your standard stuff. So this is not the way to do it. The first inventor that I discovered was Charles Garrett, who was using a bunch of parallel plates in 1935, and they called it electrolytic carburetor because they actually made a car that ran off the gas coming off of this. And there were newspapers accounts coming from the 1930s of Garrett's water car. In the modern age, most of the inventors credit Rhodes with the original invention of using parallel plates. And he had his plates floating. He only charged the plates on the ends. And he would produce a ton of these water gas clusters. He believed there was nothing special. It was just hydrogen and oxygen. He was working just at DC. Yule Brown found out that the gas had unusual characteristics for welding, and thus the Brown's gas. And he's probably the one that kind of really publicized this and created lots and lots of interest. He also noted that, gee, it didn't really matter how excited he started at DC, but he realized I could put AC over it or pulse DC across it, and I would still get plenty of gas. George Weissman did replication work, and he's probably, I would credit him with doing the most for promoting massive replication from the hobbyists, because he made the information very, very clear on his website. There have been many replications, and he was stressing the importance of using pulse DC. And he found around 600 hertz you could get a pretty good result. They've also discussed some very strange anomalies associated with Brown's gas. It adheres to matter, so it shows it's electrically polarized. There's accounts where they get electric shock. If you store some in a container and it abruptly discharges, they can feel an electric shock coming off of that. It implodes instead of explodes when they do piston experiments. They put it in a piston and expect it to explode out, and they found the piston went the other way. It has a cool flame. They showed this demonstration where they passed their hand through the flame, yet it sublimates tungsten. So if it was temperature, it would have to be an incredibly high temperature. And it would just cut your hand off if you passed your hand through it, if that's what it was. It's an anomaly. It cleanly cuts through wood, metal, ceramics. There's even claims of neutralizing radioactive waste or causing element transmutation. And you could at first just dismiss these claims as way too far out, just crazy, except for one thing. Charged clusters exhibit the same anomalies. And Ken Shoulders has shown that they adhere to dielectrics. They can bore holes right through like aluminum oxide, tough, high melting point ceramics. He suggests that what we're really doing is disrupting the electron bonds, and that's why it appears like melting. It's really not a temperature effect. We're disrupting the electron bonds in the material. He's done experiments showing element transmutation where he hits a target and shows unusual isotopic content in the craters where the charged clusters have struck. And of course, radioactivity reduction would just follow, because now you're just transmuting radioactive nuclei. Denny Klein, who you saw in the video, got a lot of publicity. He calls it HHO gas. It's basically a Brown's gas generator. He was using parallel plates, the spacing on the order of 1/4 inch. He found that nickel made better primary electrodes. He was only working 12-volt DC, so what made his patent special? What's special about his device? Well, it's the theory of Magnicules invented by Santilli. And if you like vortex rings, you'll like Magnicules, because Santilli postulates that under stimulation, atoms can undergo a new form of an electron quantum state, a new electron cloud that's shaped like a vortex, and then you have a magnetic field through the ring, and it produces a Magnicule. And when it comes together, it easily separates the hydrogen and oxygen. The scientific community just doesn't buy it, of course. I recommend his paper because it's actually well written. And to his credit, he's trying to do experimental work to support it. They work with the university down in Florida. They're showing the mass spectrum of the magnet gas, and they're getting your typical, what you would expect. There's your hydrogen, there's your water, and there's your oxygen. But these other lines, he's suggesting these are fragments, these are clusters, and they support his theory of magnicules. They even yanked this page off a wiki. You know, I was lucky to get a comment because they said, oh, everybody's disagreeing with you. However, there is plenty of literature on the web and in academia about clustering in water in general, and it's complex. They form big, big structures. Here's an article based on clathrates. Clathrates are lattices of water where there's gas in between, in the spacing of the lattice. They studied the water. They found out when they injected ions into supersonic water expansion, they're producing clusters, huge clusters, and it supports some of the modeling they're doing trying to explain the inert gas clusters. Here's our critter. This is, they call it the hydrated electron. When there's a net charge on it in a water cluster, they call it the hydrated electron, and it's an aggregate between liquid water and steam. It's a gas. It's in a gaseous form. Here it is in the standard literature. This is, in essence, the anomaly that we're producing in these brown gas operations. It's the charged water gas cluster. And it decays, one of the decay modes is into hydrogen and oxygen, and it has excessive energy from the vacuum that allows it to raise it to this anomalous energy state where we can get hydrogen and oxygen from it. Here's MIT site on water buckyballs for water clustering. In dynamic tuning, this is where the devices got the biggest effects because now we could cut our input power way back. And this is where we're starting to get the big claims of over-unity. What we do is we have a feedback circuit that measures some part of the circuit, typically the voltage across the cell, but you can measure the output. We continually adjust the frequency so as to maintain a resonance and optimize the output. And we're typically trying to resonate the water molecule. But in this case, I think we're resonating in conditions that optimize the production of the charged water cluster gas. Andrea Puharich is, I think, one of the first to use dynamic resonance. He made just a 2-cylinder device. Here's the inner electrode and the outer electrode. He'd fill it up, and he would observe some very interesting effects on the surface of the water. He would use a microscope and look. One of the things he observed was pearl chains of gas bubbles. He thought they were hydrogen. I believe they were the water charge clusters. Keep this structure in mind when we get to the Joe cell. Here's an example of a circuit that he used. He had a carrier frequency. He had a modulator. There's his frequencies, amplitude modulation. The circuitry is there. I won't go into it. Basically, he produces a waveform like this. He rectifies it, and so he's pulsing it. He's trying to resonate the water molecule to shake itself apart at the water molecule's resonant frequency, and he's using dynamic tuning to find it. Stan Myers is doing likewise. He has just 2 cylinders in his device. He has a circuit that's somewhat similar to Puharich's. He's doing amplitude modulation, pulsing it, keeping it unipolar. The carrier is unipolar pulses, and he's trying to shake apart the water. Here's an example of a later circuit from his 1992 application where he's using a phase lock loop to measure the voltage across the cell to dynamically keep tuning it to maximize the voltage across the cell, minimize the current, and it was great for producing an abundance of the gas. He got the technology honed up to where he can make a water injector, like a water spark plug. And he was going to retrofit all automobiles. You could just get a retrofit with this, where for $1,500 you can convert your car over to run on water. And the powers that be did not like it. He would not sell out. And in 1998, he was murdered. He was poisoned at a restaurant where 2 so-called investors from Belgium, were celebrating a verbal agreement that they would invest in his factory to mass produce these water injectors. He's survived by his twin brother, Stefan, who he died in his arms. Very recently, the Columbus Dispatch, a reporter, started investigating the details of the death, and it just came out. And there were audio tape interviews of all the witnesses that witnessed Stan Meyer died, but interestingly enough, the audio tapes of the 2 Belgian investors are missing. However, this made a martyr of Stan Meyer and has caused massive replication on the web. Here's one, Aaron Hill is freely sharing information, and he's trying to gather up the patent information of Stan Meyer's, and here's the details of the water injector plug. Here's the driver circuit around it. These are the coils around the water injector plug. Dave Lawton in England has probably done a tremendous job of creating worldwide application because he's sharing lots of details on how to replicate the Stan Meyer device. Patrick Kelly is teamed with him, who is basically writing up the papers for Dave Lawton, seems to be the inventor, and Patrick is the writer. They talk about conditioning the electrodes. One of the problems is on stainless steel, the bubbles adhere to the stainless steel electrodes. So you condition them. Or you use potassium hydride electrite. You run some standard electrolysis until the steel exhibits a rough white surface. During the conditioning, there'll be some brownish crud on the water surface. It's iron oxide. You just clean it off. After these electrodes are conditioned, then you don't need to use the electrolyte anymore, and they produce plenty of charged water clusters. They're sharing the circuit diagrams. They don't need to use the coils anymore. They just drive them with solid-state circuits. So it's great. It's easier and easier to do. Paul Zygouras is a recent story, very new. He was a participant in the blogs and these open source projects. He really got a fine hit. He converted a 1998 Ford Crown Victoria. He got a whopping 3 miles per gallon in the city and 6 miles per gallon in water. This is water. I don't think he was recycling his exhaust. He says, what do I need to do that for? I'm a boat builder. That's my business. There's plenty of water. They just blew it out the back, right? He got top speed of 47 miles per gallon. He was selling his circuits on eBay because there was a lot of interest in the inventing community to buy his circuits. They're just the solid state circuits he was using. And he auctioned about 6 until he got suppressed. He got shut right down. There's a fine suppression story at this website, St. Mary's Today. Came out this year, and his company is Zygouras Racing, but it was a happy ending for him because he sold out for a few million, all the water technology, and basically he might as well because he was stopped anyway. So he made, at the end. Okay. Well, I'll leave time. The nature of his electrolyzers have been discussed in the blogs and everything now that he dropped out. So he's using a nickel alloy, 316 is what they recommend in these projects. He sandblasted it to make it rough. He's used parallel plates, very small spacing. It turns out the smaller the better if it doesn't short out. He worked with a 40 kilohertz square wave around 12 volts. He actually just shifted the frequency around that. He wobbled it from +1 to -3, so he didn't really worry about dynamic tuning. He just knew he would hit it. And notice how close we are to the Keeley disassociation frequency. The wobble was on the order of a 3-second period, and he was converting about 2 gallons per minute. Thomas Kramer had a fun paper on the website. He writes with a sense of humor, and it read like step-by-step instructions on how to build a water car. And his final step was, hey, right on the side of your car, this car runs on water. Buy the decals and paste it on, and then duck, because the men in black will be visiting you soon. So this gave me an idea. If you don't want to do the experiments yourself, just go buy the decals, and we'll all put this car runs on water on our cars, and we'll keep the men in black busy. Steve Meyer's Stan's twin brother was actually electronics genius behind all Stan's work. So he's still alive, and he has a patent application in it. And notice he's added the third electrode in a cylinder configuration. Exogen up in Canada, they say some of the people that work with Myers went up there and helped found Exogen, and they're working with a parallel plate apparatus that is quite good. And they have a nice website because they really do some marketing. It used to be Exogen Power, but they couldn't do a power applications. It looks like they got shut down on that. So they can switch over to Exogen Technologies, where they're only purifying water. They're claiming we'll just clean up environmental water with this apparatus. And kind of coyly mention, oh, by the way, you can get some power out, but don't build that up anymore. Steve Chambers seems to be the primary inventor with them. And these were the patents issued. I read one of the patents, and they were using about 40 stainless steel electrodes, about 1 millimeter spacing. He worked at a higher frequency, moving up from 10 to 250 kilohertz, 90% duty cycles. He's cut his power way back. It was running about 3.6 watts. He could produce about 1 pound per square inch of his water gas per minute. What was special about his patent, he was claiming he can control producing ortho versus para hydrogen with a coil assembly. The Joe cell has been kind of famous because it seems so simple. It appears that they're only working at DC. They have large spacing, and it's very difficult to do. It appears to me that they stress that the surface has to be just right, getting it filled up just to the brink of the electrodes, that they're actually producing a macroscopic organization across the whole cell, because they say when the cell is quiet between the center and the outside, it exhibits a 1 volt voltage just on its own, just like polarization. And if you should take an electrode from the inside to the outside and just short out the cell, you kill the Joe cell, and you have to start all over again. It's very fragile. Alex Schieffer has done a very good job of trying to share details, information on how to do it in a step-by-step process. And some of the things he suggests is work with very good water, live water from a running stream, a mountain stream. You fill up the water to the top. You gradually add electrolyte. This is to condition the cell in the first place until it conducts about an amp at 12 volts. You only charge for 5 minutes a day. Then you cover the cell and let it sit for 24 hours. And then if you're patient, in about 4 weeks, your cell might work. Right? During the charging, you'll see a brownish residue on the water. You just clean it off with the paper towel. That's just the iron oxide. I don't really recommend this project for replication because the people who have tried, it's so fragile and so difficult to do. However, it worked for Joe, and Barry Hilton wrote an article after interviewing Joe. Joe doesn't want his last name known because he's been suppressed and all that, and everybody's been honoring not disclosing his last name. Wouldn't it be ironic if his last name were Sell? His first device was just 2 cylinders. I'm just surprised he got anything out of it, running DC. He's claiming getting the water gas. The second device was parallel plates. And his third device was finally concentric cylinders. And this is the device people play with today. Paul Pantone shared at the 2000 conference that his GEET apparatus had a water anomaly that he didn't really discuss publicly or play up too much. But he said if you circulate water through his manifold, and notice they have a pipe down the feed, right in the heart of the feed system where he feeds the fuel. You feed water down there, and you tend to get a vorticity around the pipe. And then the exhaust will come up, and there's another vortex to form on the outside of the pipe. That if you did this with water and you have a glass window on the manifold to look in, you'd see this bluish glow and this blue lightning-like activity. And I said, hey, Paul, that would be great. The inventing community would love to replicate that because that would intrigue everybody, and you want to study it and produce a water anomaly. So, and I said, this also sounds like the work of Victor Schauberger, who is claiming to observe something similar. In his vortex studies, they were seeing and measuring anomalous energy production in his water turbine vortex experiments, as well as in his later tornado generator, when they circulate water in a precessional manner, that's a spin of a spin down the whirl pipes, they would see the bluish glow at the tips. Right, so there's something going on in a macroscopic manner of organizing water. So to summarize, we can make charged water gas clusters as the source of the energy. When we pulse the water, it forms up in these clusters, and it's supported by the other studies of the anomalous clusters forming under abrupt pulsing, organizing the vacuum energy. Exhibits anomalies, the big anomalies like transmutation. If that work can be repeated, it would pretty well cement the case that we're actually activating vacuum energy because that's the only energy density is big enough that it could actually influence the nucleus. The inventions all use multiple electrodes. The closer you space them, the better. Whether they're parallel plates or cylinders, we work with unipolar pulses. Whoops. Oh, let's go back. Go back. Backspace. Backspace. Hit backspace.
Did it go forward for you? Push the button.
I want to go back.
Oh, there it goes.
I want to go back.
Oh, you want to go back? Excuse me.
Okay. I got it. We work with multiple electrodes, work with unipolar pulses. We work around the Keeley dissociation frequency, 42.8 kilohertz. We'll get big effects using dynamic tuning. So what can we do at home? We can all replicate if you have the talent. The information is being shared on the web. I recommend that you go back to the very sites that are open source sites and share the information because massive replication will change the world. Remember, massive replication will beat suppression. Thank you. have books on this if you want to read some more. And you guys are up. Let's have some questions.
We have about 7.5 minutes for questions and answers for anybody that would like to address one to Moray. Hold your hand up and we'll pass the microphone to you. Testing. Okay, when you get the mic, turn the mute on and off right here on the bottom of the mic. It'll say. Okay, go ahead. Turn it on. Mute, it's either on or mute. See it on the bottom there? There we go. Okay, go ahead.
I visited Paul Zagoras. The ending, I don't think, is happy. He was sandbagged for money. So I got an email the day before yesterday on that. And most of these patents are expired, so go for it. Stan Meyer's expired June 27th.
Well, I know you guys have questions.
Did we have any other questions there? Hold up your hand. And if you're able to just pass the microphone to whoever's got their hand up when I'm not there. Right now I'm trying to trim the mic.
I'm just wondering, is this on? Okay. In presenting all this material, you gave us an ocean of information. Are you going to make this PowerPoint presentation available?
Yes.
Okay, good. And also, could you summarize in 2-3 sentences the mechanism that you envision in your mind of how these different water electrolysis modalities are harnessing zero-point energy?
Okay. Well, I was hoping that was the point of my talk. We're inducing the existence of charged water clusters. And the pattern is they are very similar to Ken Shoulders charged clusters, plasmoids that form up under pulse conditions. During the pulsing, the creation of these clusters, we're trapping vacuum energy into the cluster. This is what's raising the energy state. Now, once we have the energetic charged water cluster, we can either use it straight up, like they're using Brown's gas, or it tends to decay into hydrogen and oxygen. But the point was, we had to grab energy from somewhere in order to raise the energy state, and that's the mechanism. It's self-organization from the vacuum occurring during the formation of the vortex ring or during formation of the charge cluster. Is that a good summary?
On the Joe cell, could you tell me, is there an atmospheric or humidity, or why can't you get the constant repeatable? In other words, is it the phase of the moon or gravity or what? The Joe cell, how come it's not consistent?
You ask a perfect question to lead into Dan Davidson's talk, because he's going to really focus on it on the next talk.
I was wondering, could you describe a little bit how the carrier frequency works together with the Keeley frequency, and also especially in Denny Klein's invention?
Okay, there's two questions. Denny Klein was actually using DC. The carrier frequency is around the Keeley dissociation frequency. That is the carrier. The modulation is used to shift that frequency a little bit around that window, because the whole system's highly nonlinear with all the bubbling and all the activity, and not one simple frequency is going to do the job. The frequency has to be constantly shifted to maximize the output. Okay?
Great presentation with a lot of information. I was writing as fast as I can. If you could just give us one sheet with all the web pages that we could do the rest of our study for the rest of the year, that would be great. Just one sheet with all the web addresses would be
I think what we'll do is we'll put the entire PowerPoint presentation, I'll arrange for Steve to get it up on the TeslaTech website. And then you can use the live links to go right out to the links.
When you're shifting the frequencies, is that because, like for the different cells, is that because it changes if you keep it at the same, or like what is the reason for shifting it so often?
Okay, good question. It's because the boundary conditions are constantly changing during the bubbling activity of the cell. It's not a static system at all. There's no one set boundary conditions for the resonance. And so the point of shifting and the point of dynamic tuning is finding that window to get the optimal point.
Do you know of any good sources for information on how to burn oil more efficiently, like in an oil burner, like in New England where it's used for heat?
Oh, I'm sure you could, of course, many suggest using this mixed with gas. Definitely ups the gas production for one. And they're saying that on the web. In fact, Denny Klein is cooperating. He's agreeing not to say we're only running the cars on water. We're running it by helping to make gasoline burn better. And he's working with the powers that be and cooperating.
Have you been suppressed? And if so, what advice do you have for those in the audience?
I personally have, and I notice there's a pattern here. They don't seem to suppress the talkers. That's because there must be 1,000 to 10,000 talkers for every guy doing the real work. So the pattern has been they wait to a project actually maturing to the point where it can threaten the marketplace. So garage guy typically won't get hurt until you seek publicity. My recommendation is use the web, help get the knowledge, successfully do the experiment, and then share back onto the web, into the blogs, and into what you did and the details of which to help the other inventors. Because it's massive replication that would beat the suppression. And if you get stopped, you get stopped. My recommendation is just stop and know full well that others will carry on.
I'm on. Have you heard of the Hydro Star? I got these prints from a guy in Mesa, Arizona. Any information on it?
Not off the top of my head. I tell you, I was swamped when I read the web. There is so much out there. It was overwhelming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I was in solar energy in the 70s, and we had Barry Commoner as like a spokesman and lobbyist for that. You seem to be doing that in this hydrogen thing. Do you have a website, and are you going to continue doing this?
Not personally. You can Google my name and get to my stuff. But yeah, my friend Dave Faust says I'm a cheerleader. Some of us play the game, and some of us cheer. I guess you need a little of both to make it entertaining.
Do you have some kind of a strategy or recommendation for convincing the mainstream science community of this work?
Yes. It's got to actually be kind of fun, because it starts with us. The inventing community keeps replicating, okay, until the point where everybody's doing it, the garage guy's doing it, and retrofitting cars, and they can't suppress everybody. Then I'll quietly approach academia, a few brave souls in academia that will replicate, right? They don't want to be embarrassed. That's the big deal with them. They don't want their colleagues to know. Then they, in turn, will have a colleague replicate, still quietly. And then as a group, they might bravely step forward and say, oh, we can kind of do what everybody else is doing.
I was just wondering if we have a member of the CIA in the audience who's trying to blind the photographer with the laser beam.
Yes, we...
this is out of order, guys, whoever's doing it.
Yes, we do have representatives from that community, because this is the Kooks and Spooks Conference.
The green and sustainable venture capital movement is growing very large. There's entire conferences dedicated to that, and I will do everything I can to link this group to those groups, because it is the ideal marriage. There are huge numbers of people that are the cultural creatives that are looking at how can we get out of an oil-based economy? How can we create a sustainable world? They are your market. So I just want you to know that you should be speaking at LOHAS and places like that.
Well, great. If I get invited, I guess I'll go speak.
By the way, the little red laser running around is not CIA trying to blind the camera person. That's the camera people communicating with each other because their interwire link failed for a moment there.
If you weren't just a talker and you went out in the shop and did something, would you, out of all the technologies that you've discussed today, which would be, in your opinion, a combination, or which one would you choose, let's say, to try to replicate? Which is the most efficient, and whether it's over Unity or not? Could you make a recommendation on that?
I would recommend the parallel plates. They're the easiest to work with, and then just go out to the websites and read what the other people are doing. And then depending on your talent with electrical drivers, it's in the electronics where the real efficiencies and where the over unity is going to come from. To work with somebody that can understand the nature of the pulsing that needs to be done, and they'll make a circuit. It's quite easy to make the circuits these days with the solid state chips.
Hi, I'd just like to make a comment to everyone, not to underplay the possibility of water purification. In a world where 2 billion people don't have clean water to drink, it could also have an impact there, and I just wanted to draw your attention to it.
And that's the primary focus of Exogen Technologies in Canada, clean up polluted water.
I was wondering if you ever look on the website make.com, and I know that's a way to get it out to a bunch of hobbyists around the world to, I don't know if they have anything like this yet. I haven't watched Make for several months, but that seems like a great place to get it out there.
Okay. There's tremendous websites out already. And by the way, I recommend the panaceauniversity.org. They're trying to really rally an open source movement.
Just another comment to help do my little part. I do sell George Wiseman's brown gas machines, and as part of this conference, I will discount them 10% off of what Eagle Research has got them listed for. So if anybody wants to experiment, that's my little part.
All right, thank you, Larry.
The yellow machine out front.
And if you are looking for a source, Larry's a very, very good source to it. Ladies and gentlemen, Moray King, thank you. Okay, we're going to take about a 10-minute break, and we'll see you back in a little bit. Thank you.